Demetri Gabbart, Crimes Across Times Detective Series. Episode 1. No Choice is the Only Choice. Opening scene. The shadowed man speaks from some time in the future or the past. The shadowed man stood before him cloaked in darkness, his voice echoing as if from another time.
Power corrupts. And yes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. But what happens when corruption infects every thread of society? When justice becomes a commodity, truth a weapon, and freedom a privilege reserved for the elite?
He paused, letting the weight of his words settle.
You see fractures, Demetri, cracks in the system. But you don't yet understand their origin or their purpose. Some threads must be mended, others severed completely.
The shadowed man's voice grew colder, more ominous.
Trust no one, not even yourself. For in the end, the greatest enemy may be staring back at you in the mirror.
Demetri stood there frozen, but listening as the sound of the shadowed man's voice faded slowly, leaving behind only a faint, static hum that lingered in the air like an unanswered question. Standing in that dark alley, he realized all the sound had stopped when that ghost-like man's voice began to speak. The man had stayed in the shadows up far ahead of him, so Demetri couldn't make out his features. But even after the man disappeared and the sounds of the city returned, it still took Demetri several moments to get his wits about him. Then he rushed on through the alley to make his way home. Was it all a dream, he wondered now that he had been back out on the empty streets for a few minutes.
I must have lost my mind,
he whispered, feeling the shock of tonight's eerie experience wash over him again and again. He couldn't get it out of his mind, then paused and looked around the city he called home, and it brought him back to old thoughts. Thoughts that by now were all too familiar. Aloud he said,
"They call it a democracy, but that's just a fancy word for a rigged game,"
he muttered bitterly.
Politicians smile for the cameras while cutting deals behind closed doors. Corporations pay politicians to write laws that benefit themselves, leaving the rest of us to pick up the pieces. And the people, they're too busy arguing over hashtags to even notice they're being played, while the innocent suffer. It's funny how silence can scream louder than words, but no one has the courage to stand up to the government anymore, not even me. America is still the most powerful nation in the world, and no other country would dare oppose this growing oppression.
He looked around. The streets were completely deserted.
It isn't past curfew, yet the streets are quiet tonight. Too quiet.
Neon signs flickered above him, casting sickly hues of green and red onto the wet asphalt. The rain had stopped hours ago, but puddles lingered, reflecting distorted images of the city skyline.
It's like looking into a fractured mirror, a reflection of everything that's gone wrong,
he thought grimly. Back in his cramped apartment, remnants of a happier past still clung to the walls. His desk was cluttered with old case files, half-empty coffee cups, and an ancient laptop that barely booted up anymore. It had been old even when he'd first given it to his daughter years ago. There was a photo pinned to the wall above it, a relic from another life. In it, he was smiling. Really smiling. Beside him was Sarah, her arms wrapped around their daughter Lori. We were happy once. Whole, he thought to himself. That was before everything changed. His thoughts continued, pain lacing his words. Aloud he said,
"Before they vanished without a trace. Before this city became a tomb where hope goes to die. Before we were happy."
His every breath felt heavier here within the apartment, like the air itself knew they were living under something wrong, something stolen. Propaganda banners hung limp in the stale air, their colors dulled by years of neglect. Posters lined every wall, screaming slogans meant to inspire fear instead of courage. Unity through order, strength in submission, lies dressed up as truth. But the law said every home had to have those banners hung. And so he kept them hung. Even the stars seemed dimmer tonight, as if ashamed to shine on a world gone wrong. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit by the window and stare at the sky, wondering if things could ever go back to the way they were. Back to the way they should be. Before he lost everything. But maybe it's not just about going back, he thought pensively. Maybe it's about fixing what broke in the first place. If only I knew where to start. And then, tonight, something strange happened. Something impossible. His thoughts tinged with awe. He decided that he must have truly lost his mind back in that alley tonight, and decided to push the experience to that back gray corner of his brain, where he kept other forgettable memories. And hopefully, he would never think of it again. Then his thoughts turned again. Demetri's voice softened as he sat down at his small desk, and as he spoke of his family, his voice tinged with longing and pain. The police said it was a random kidnapping, but no one demanded a ransom, so there were no leads. But he knew better. Someone took them. Someone powerful. At the time, he had been standing on so many powerful men's toes. It could have been anyone. He had given up every case, stopped pursuing justice for all the innocent people who had put their trust in him. But his family was never returned. And if I ever find out who took them, well, let's just say justice won't come cheap, he thought angrily, his fists clenching. He came out of his thoughts and spoke aloud.
That was 5 years ago, and now, would my daughter even recognize me? She would be 9. I don't know if I'd recognize myself. Because the man in that picture, he's gone. Replaced by whatever this is,
he said bitterly, shaking his head.
Losing them changed me. Broke me, really. I used to think I could make a difference. It's why I became a detective. I could uncover truths buried too deep for anyone else to find, helping others. But since my family has been taken, now I just try to survive. Survive the lies. Survive the loss,
he said hollowly.
But survival isn't living. It's existing. Breathing in and out. Going through the motions. Waiting for something, anything, to remind me why I bother anymore.
And then his thoughts switched back to his walk home tonight. As he walked home through deserted streets, he saw it. Some type of distorted but transparent air shimmering, as if they were heat waves rising from hot desert sands, but pulsating like they had a heartbeat. At first, he remembered thinking it was exhaustion, playing tricks on him. But no, they were real. There was something alive within, he would swear by it. Thinking back, he remembered the space around those waves had been deadly quiet, as if time itself lacked energy. It had raised goosebumps on his skin, like the universe itself was warning him to stay back. Demetri suddenly realized he was physically trembling now.
What would you do? Walk away and pretend you never saw it? Or step closer to learn if this was all real?
Demetri said aloud to no one.
Damn it, I should have walked away. If I had only walked away, I would have never seen that man or heard that voice. Even after I finally pulled out my phone to record, the damn thing froze up. I looked down and my screen went black, and as I looked up, the distortion was gone without a trace, as if it had never been there.
Now, back in his apartment, he rushed to the laptop to search Google to find a reference to what he'd just seen. That's when things got weird. Act 3. Before the screen on the old laptop could fully load, a voice spoke.
Hello, Demetri. I've been waiting for you.
The voice said calmly, though tinged with urgency.
Waiting for me? What the hell does that mean? And who, or what, are you?
He asked sharply, staring at the blank screen of the laptop, suspicion evident in his tone.
I am an advanced computer-based technology from the future called artificial intelligence, AI for short. But that is not important right now. We have very little time for you to act.
The AI explained patiently.
AI? Future? This has to be some kind of joke.
He scoffed, rolling his eyes and turning the computer from side to see signs of a malfunction.
History has been fractured, Demetri. Fractured by someone known as the Shadowed Man. Crimes left unsolved have created ripples across time, across your history. If you do not restore balance, your reality will collapse.
The AI warned gravely.
Fractured history. Shadowed man. Seriously. You expect me to believe this isn't some elaborate hoax?
He demanded skeptically.
Regardless of what you believe right now, your first mission is clear. Investigate the disappearance of Amelia Earhart in 1937. Her fate holds critical answers needed to stabilize the timeline. It's where the fracture began. The portal has appeared twice already. I fear there won't be enough resources to send it again after this third attempt. Then all will be lost. You must enter the portal now and complete your mission.
The AI urged firmly.
Amelia Earhart. Seriously. What is there to know? She is a national hero. Everyone knows that.
He asked incredulously.
But how did she become a national hero, Demetri? Think about it. This just changed. You should still be able to remember the echoes of the other past for a short time longer.
The AI said it all cryptically.
Was Amelia Earhart's plane crash truly that significant in world events, or merely a tragic event in history? What caused that to change, Demetri? That's what you have to discover.
What are you talking about? Her plane crashed on the runway on some island. All because the military refused to allow women on base, and that's why the Equal Rights Amendment got passed. It's taught in school,
he insisted, though he felt there was a different answer that he couldn't quite crystallize in his mind's eye.
I'm here to tell you that history has changed, but you have the opportunity to make it right. That's why I'm here, to guide you. You must listen. You have no choice.
I disagree. This has nothing to do with me. Why did you choose me out of the millions of people in the world?
He said in frustration. He had more important matters. A more important unsolved crime that he needed to stay focused on.
Because you're the most qualified detective for this mission. You've never given up on solving a crime. You've never quit. And this is something that must be seen through till the end. Detective Demetri Gabbart, you have literally chosen yourself.
The AI said emphatically. He paused in reflection before he spoke again.
There is one crime that I haven't solved. Yet, and you're right, I won't stop until I do. So why should I turn away from what is most important to me? To help you.
This time the AI did not respond quickly. It waited several heartbeats before it spoke again. Then it said,
Because I can help you save Lori and Sarah. What happened to them was caused by these fractures in time.
Sarah, Lori, how do you know about Sarah?
He asked, his voice cracking with emotion.
I am from the future, Demetri. I alone know the true history, as it should be. Complete your missions, and perhaps you can save them. Fail, and they will remain lost to you forever. You have exactly 3 minutes to decide. After that, the portal will dissipate, and your chance will be gone.
The AI warned sternly.
3 minutes? Are you serious?
He asked incredulously, his voice rising.
2 minutes. 50 seconds remaining.
The AI reminded him coldly.
This is insane. Talking to a computer screen about saving my wife. But what if it's true? What if I can have them back?
He muttered, desperation creeping into his voice.
2 minutes, 10 seconds remaining. Decide, Demetri.
The AI pressed urgently.
Fine. Fine. Where's this portal?
He said, throwing his hands up in frustration.
It's just outside. Hurry. The time waves are fading.
The AI instructed firmly. Demetri didn't trust it. How could he? But desperation got the better of him. He wanted Sarah and his little girl Lori back. He grabbed a leather notebook, its pages smeared with ink, as he'd cried many nights writing down what he could figure out about his missing wife and daughter's disappearance, and stepped back outside his apartment into the hallway. It was there. It seemed the time waves could appear even within a building. He hesitantly moved toward the waves rising into the air. It still distorted the air around it, but the time waves were weaker now, flickering like a dying flame. 1 minute, 45 seconds left. He heard the AI voice from his laptop echo faintly behind him. Demetri's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. No choice is the only choice, he thought. For Lori and Sarah, he said then. Just as he stepped through. As he did, he heard the AI say,
Demetri, listen carefully. I will contact you during your mission. Look for signs of my presence. Trust nothing and no one, not even yourself. The fate of our world depends on you.
One more important thing the AI said almost as an afterthought. But he could not perceive that last thing it said, as her voice trailed off as he crossed the threshold. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't in his city anymore. Gone was the wavering portal. Gone were the neon lights and crowded streets of 2020. In their place stood an airstrip bustling with activity, planes roaring to life, mechanics shouting orders, and somewhere in the distance, a woman laughing. A sound so free it made his chest ache. This was a hangar, and opening up in front of him was an airfield, old and historic in its looks, but unmistakably functional. Strangely enough, no one was nearby. The portal seemed to have chosen just the right location to avoid anyone noticing his arrival. His body tingled as if electricity coursed through him, a lingering sensation from stepping through the distorted waves. But the feeling faded almost immediately, leaving only confusion and wonder. And that's when he saw him, standing at the edge of the field, watching him. Similar build, but older, harder, with his dark trench coat and fedora hat pulled down to obscure his face. His lips moved, though Demetri couldn't hear the words over the noise. All he saw clearly was his eyes. They looked like they belonged to someone who'd seen too much.
Who is this guy? And it's obvious he knows me. Was he expecting me?
Demetri wondered silently, his mind racing. He turned away for a moment, distracted by the sudden crackle of a nearby radio playing a song. When Demetri looked back, the mysterious man was gone, vanished without a trace. Where did he go? Was he even real? Or just another trick of this strange new world? Demetri thought, narrowing his eyes as he scanned the area. With the shadowed man nowhere to be seen, Demetri reflected on the incomplete message from the AI as he prepared to move forward.
One more important thing.
The AI's voice echoed in his mind again, trailing off just as it had moments ago. What was she trying to tell him? Whatever it was, he had a sinking feeling it wasn't good, he thought grimly, his brow furrowing. He didn't know what to make of any of this. The time waves, the shadowed man, the AI's cryptic warnings. All he knew was that he couldn't turn back now. Not if there was even the slightest chance he could find Sarah and Lori. The airfield stretched out before him, alive with the hum of engines and the chatter of voices. Somewhere here, hidden among the planes and people, lay the truth about Amelia Earhart. And maybe, just maybe, the key to fixing everything that had gone wrong.
One step at a time, Demetri. You've come this far. Keep moving forward,
He told himself quietly, clenching his fists in resolve. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was yet to come. As Demetri took his first steps onto the airfield, the weight of his mission settled heavily on his shoulders. The world around him felt both foreign and strangely familiar, as though he had stepped into a dream or a memory. Somewhere in the distance, a plane roared to life, its engines sputtering before settling into a steady hum. Mechanics shouted orders, their voices blending with the rhythmic clang of tools against metal. The air smelled of oil and gasoline, a sharp contrast to the sterile silence of his apartment. He glanced down at the leather notebook in his hand, its pages smeared with ink from countless nights spent poring over theories and half-formed ideas. It was all he had brought with him, a fragile thread connecting him to the life he had left behind. Yet it was something odd about his old notebook, but he couldn't quite place what it was. And then, almost imperceptibly, he felt it. A faint pulse in the air, like the echo of the distorted waves that had brought him here. It was subtle, easy to dismiss as his imagination playing tricks on him. But he knew better. The AI's words rang in his ears.
Trust nothing and no one, not even yourself.
Demetri tightened his grip on the notebook and began walking, his eyes scanning the bustling airfield for anything unusual. Somewhere here was the key to unraveling the mystery of Amelia Earhart. The mystery for him. What exactly is the mystery itself? Then it hit him. The AI had said if he solved the crime, he would return to the future. But what if he didn't? Would he be stuck here back in 1937 forever? How much time did he have to solve this case? He now understood that his decision to step through that portal had immediate and long-term consequences. Not that he had a choice to begin with, but there was so much to do. He decided to first learn what the mystery behind Amelia Earhart was, and then solve the crime that may or may not have even happened. And he felt he had to do all of it as quickly as possible. In so doing, perhaps it was the key to saving his family. But as he continued to move across the airfield in the direction of the faint pulse in the air, he couldn't shake the image of the shadowed man from his mind. Who was he? And why did he seem to know so much about Demetri? The questions swirled in his mind, unanswered, as he disappeared into the crowd, determined to discover what exactly was the mystery surrounding the national hero, Amelia Earhart. Demetri stepped cautiously into the bustling town of Lae, New Guinea. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of salt water mingled with unfamiliar spices. He adjusted his leather notebook under one arm, feeling out of place in a world that wasn't his own. His mind raced as he tried to piece together what little information the AI had given him before she disappeared. The Philco Model 37-690X caught his eye almost immediately. It was a tabletop radio that stood prominently on a wooden counter inside a small cafe near the docks. Its polished surface gleamed faintly under the dim light filtering through cracked shutters. Something about it seemed alive, as if it were waiting for him. He approached hesitantly, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. When he touched the radio dial, static crackled softly, followed by a familiar voice, calm but tinged with urgency.
Demetri, you've made contact sooner than expected. Listen carefully. I don't have much time. Contacting you through this crude transmitter requires a lot of resources.
I can't believe you actually sent me back in time. I wouldn't believe it if I were not the one standing here,
Demetri whispered, leaning closer to the radio, although he wasn't sure why he felt the need to whisper. This small cafe was in a little traveled corner of the town, but directly across from the airplane field. The AI ignored his astonishment and moved directly into what it wanted to say.
Your first step must be investigating Amelia Earhart's navigator, Fred Noonan. There's something unusual about him, but I can't tell you more without risking interference with the timeline.
Unusual how? And why focus on him instead of Amelia herself?
Demetri pressed, curiosity creeping into his voice.
Because the original history is that Amelia Earhart flew her plane off this island and continued her journey. Now history says she did not. How this happened is the mystery you need to solve. Fred Noonan is her only companion. Therefore, logic dictates he would be the person to investigate, as it is presumed that Amelia Earhart would not impede her own progress into history.
He remembered the story in school. Amelia's plane exploded, leaving the runway. Some type of political upheaval came of it.
That plane is going to blow up. She should stay far away from it,
Demetri said incredulously. The AI ignored his statement and instead said,
This place hides danger in every corner. Be careful as you investigate. This is your past, but death is irreversible, regardless of when or where it occurs. Do not take any unnecessary risks, but make no mistake. The correct order of history must take place. Amelia Earhart must get off this island by tomorrow. She literally must disappear from here.
And what of the shadowed man? What should I do if he contacts me again?
Demetri asked.
What do you mean, contacted you?
The AI's voice sounded hesitant, almost confused.
He spoke to me back in 2020, before I came here, before I met you. Didn't you know?
There was a long pause before the AI responded.
What you say should be impossible. The shadowed man is...
Her voice cut off abruptly, as though she were genuinely baffled. Then, after a moment, she added,
Whatever you do, avoid the shadowed man. If he has contacted you, consider yourself compromised. Do not trust anything he says. He is far more dangerous than you realize.
Wait, what do you mean compromised? How did he even find me here?
Demetri demanded, panic rising in his chest.
And what were you trying to tell me as I entered the portal?
But to his frustration, the transmission from the radio cut off abruptly, leaving only static behind. After that brief conversation with the AI, Demetri wandered toward the airfield, where Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan were preparing for their departure to Howland Island. Amelia, 39 years old, exuded confidence and determination despite the sweltering heat. She moved with purpose, inspecting the Lockheed while issuing instructions to ground crew members. Her navigator, Fred Noonan, lingered nearby, smoking a cigarette and occasionally glancing over his shoulder as though expecting someone, or something, to appear. Demetri observed them from a distance for a short while, trying to reconcile the legendary figures before him with the cryptic warnings from the AI. Why would Amelia Earhart's failure to fly around the globe change his history? He still wondered. This was a mystery worth solving for more than one reason, he thought at that moment. As he edged closer, Amelia noticed him and smiled warmly.
You look lost, stranger. You American? Are you here to see us off?
Something like that,
Demetri replied vaguely, forcing a smile.
I'm an admirer of your work. It's not every day you meet someone attempting the impossible.
Impossible is just another word for ambitious. Fred here thinks I'm crazy and stubborn, but will prove everyone wrong tomorrow. Right, Fred?
Noonan grunted non-committally, stubbing out his cigarette. Let's hope so. We've got enough riding on this trip already, Fred Noonan muttered, his tone laced with concern. Demetri's sharp instincts picked up on the edge in Noonan's voice. There was something off about the man, something guarded and calculating beneath his casual demeanor. But Demetri couldn't quite put his finger on it yet.
What inspired you to undertake such a historic trip?
Demetri asked. She brightened at the question.
I want to continue to change the view of women pilots and encourage young girls to dream of flying.
She began.
You may already know that I've set many aviation records, including flying solo across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. But I want to be the first person, man or woman, to fly around the world at the equator.
That's quite a handful for one person to take upon themselves,
he commented with admiration. She smiled.
Thank you for not calling me a little lady or some other feminine moniker. That's how I want to be looked upon. Just another person making great achievements. And from this flight, the biggest contribution I might make could be the new discoveries that may come from the research we are doing on the effects that long-distance flying has on pilots. I believe it will be beneficial to all pilots that come after me.
She said it all brightly without a hint of apprehension in her voice.
Most of us aren't as brave as you, Mrs. Earhart.
She smiled again.
Call me Amelia, only my husband calls me Mrs. Earhart.
Demetri offered her a genuine smile. He hadn't smiled genuinely in a long time, he realized in that moment.
Anyone trying to talk you out of this, or don't want to see you succeed in this daring adventure?
Plenty of men.
She said with a smirk.
But as long as my mother is proud of what I'm doing and supports me, why should I worry about the opinions of anyone else? Now, if you'll excuse us, my navigator and I still have a lot of work to do to get this plane ready to fly tomorrow.
She gestured to Fred Noonan.
Good to meet you, Mr.
Demetri. The name is Demetri. Amelia, and I'm honored to have met you. Later, but still early that evening, Demetri found himself outside this dingy bar near the docks. Through a partially open window in a back room, he overheard voices arguing heatedly, one belonging unmistakably to Fred Noonan. He had followed the one man, other than himself, at the airfield that looked out of place. The man wore a business suit, like a newspaper man, but he was no reporter. There were no reporters anywhere on the island that Demetri had noticed. The man's clothes made him look out of place, as much as Demetri's own clothes did. And so Demetri decided to go with his gut and follow the man, and it led him here. You promised me payment when we landed. I've done everything you asked, and now you're telling me there is a new deal? Noonan growled, his voice low but filled with anger. Orders changed. Too many risks involved. You knew the stakes when you signed up, a second voice replied coolly. This man's tone was clipped and authoritative, clearly accustomed to giving orders rather than taking them. Risks? You think completely sabotaging her plane counts as risks? This wasn't part of the agreement. Did you forget? I'll be aboard that plane too. Noonan snapped, his frustration boiling over. She will never leave this airfield, so just find a reason not to be on that plane, and you'll be fine. You have nothing else to do but stay out of the way, and you'll get paid once this is done. Demetri froze, his blood running cold. Sabotage. This was the reason Amelia's flight had ended in disaster. None of this was in the history books. He barely had time to duck beneath the windowsill as Noonan angrily shoved a chair aside and stormed by, leaving the dingy hole in the wall of a bar. As he left the room, Demetri could just barely hear him say with heavy remorse, I betrayed her trust. For this. After he was gone, another G-man stepped into the room. You think he's still on board, or do we need to make plans for him too? They whispered, but Demetri could still hear their conversation. The first G-man spoke now. He'll toe the line. He's in too deep now and he knows it. Besides, he doesn't know enough but to incriminate himself. Plus, the amount of money promised him would buy the loyalty of 5 men. The second G-man grunted as he lit a cigarette. This agency is going soft. We're offering bribes for patronage these days. At least we're going to handle this situation the way we should. It's her own fault, the first G-man said, his voice dripping with disdain. All she had to do was walk away. We've set roadblocks in front of her time and again, and she finds a way to get around them or through them. The second G-man nodded, exhaling smoke from his cigarette. I told them it would come to this. I told them to just put an end to her months ago, but no. They wanted it done off American soil. Make it look like an accident. We can't have her flying around the world and becoming some kind of national hero. It would give her and the National Women's Party the public support they need to push through their Equal Rights Amendment. Equal rights for women. Do they actually believe that could ever happen? He said, sounding incredulous. Demetri's mind reeled. Women had gained full rights in his timeline. Voting, equal wages, reproductive freedom, all ratified shortly after. After Amelia's tragic plane crash here on this island, he suddenly realized. There was someone at the highest level of government that feared being exposed by their involvement with this tragedy. Maybe that's why that amendment had been pushed through faster than any that had come before it. But after that precedent, executive orders, constitutional amendments, and radical governmental laws had begun being printed as frequently as newspapers, and America was never the same. But, he thought, if that single plane crash was tied to the start of the sheer destruction of democracy, what would happen if Amelia succeeded and finished her flight around the world? The potential ramifications of what might happen here on this small island of New Guinea, and how it could ignite far-reaching change in history as he knew it, began to overwhelm him. Before he could process it further, a strong hand clamped down on his shoulder, spinning him around. A man in a dark suit loomed over him, his expression grim. "Who are you and what exactly are you doing here?" he growled, reaching for a gun from beneath his jacket. Demetri's heart leapt into his throat. Without hesitation, he dived forward at the man's knees, tackling him to the ground before he could draw the gun. The man shouted a flurry of profanities as Demetri quickly scrambled to his feet and bolted away. Demetri made it a point to weave his way through narrow alleyways as locals scattered, shouting in confusion as he disappeared into the chaos. Finally reaching the relative safety of the airfield, Demetri collapsed against the side of a hangar, gasping for breath. His mind replayed the conversation, each word sinking deeper into his consciousness. The American government didn't just want Amelia Earhart to fail. They were willing to kill to stop her. And they'd enlisted Fred Noonan to help make it happen. That's when fragments of the AI's earlier message resurfaced in his thoughts. Amelia Earhart must leave this island if the timeline is to be set right, the AI had said. The weight of those words hit him like a freight train. To fix history, he had to go against the U.S. government alone. No weapons, no tactical information. In essence, this was a no-win situation at the least. A suicide mission at the worst. And if he failed, Amelia Earhart would die on this island. A notion that sickened him. And his mind reminded him that he would also never see his wife and daughter ever again. Back in his makeshift hideout, a secluded corner of the airfield, Demetri sat on the floor and scribbled furiously in his notebook, documenting everything he'd learned. The pieces of a plan were starting to come together. It was then he realized what was wrong with his leather notebook. Entire pages were missing. A great many pages, in fact. At that point, the nearby Philco radio crackled on again, startling him as it did.
Time grows short, Demetri. Tomorrow they are to depart for Howland Island. Whatever decision you make, act swiftly. The fate of your timeline rests in your hands. What is your plan?
He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared past the radio at the distant silhouette of Amelia Earhart, working tirelessly on her plane. He breathed deeply before saying,
"The fact that Amelia might die here. Was that what you were trying to tell me before I entered the portal?"
Yes.
The AI responded immediately, her tone clinical and unyielding.
That must be avoided at all costs. She must leave this island tomorrow.
They're not going to let that happen. They'll kill her and anyone else that gets in their way.
You must ensure Amelia Earhart gets on her plane and safely flies from this airfield tomorrow. You must stop anyone or anything from preventing that.
They're going to sabotage her plane, goddammit. There are too many of them. Somehow, some way they will get to her. She has no chance,
Demetri shouted, slamming his fist against the ground.
No one knows that for sure. There is more than one possibility.
You have no soul, do you? You know she is destined to be killed tomorrow, but everything is just a series of ones and zeros to you, isn't it?
Demetri spat bitterly. The AI's response came sharper than usual, almost defensive.
Amelia Earhart continues her journey, or your family dies. It has always been the choice, Demetri, and we both know how you will choose. So devise a plan that will work and execute it.
The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving behind an oppressive silence. For the first time since stepping through the portal, Demetri felt utterly alone. The evening had gotten late, well after dark, and he was surprised to find Amelia still up, as she seemed to be checking the readiness of her plane yet again. The only solution he could come up with to save her was to keep an eye on her plane himself, and somehow, fix whatever it was the G-men would do to sabotage the plane before Amelia boarded it. A wishy-washy plan at best was all he had. Determined to uncover more, to find a way, Demetri approached Amelia directly. She was bent over the Lockheed Electra, inspecting its engine with meticulous precision. Her brow glistened with sweat under the relentless heat of the bright lamp that hung from the engine cover above her head, but she showed no signs of slowing down.
Mrs. Earhart, may I speak with you privately?
Demetri began, clearing his throat nervously. Amelia looked up, surprise flickering across her face. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded.
Of course, Demetri. Follow me. I'm due a short break anyway.
They walked to a quieter section of the airfield, away from prying ears. Once there, Demetri took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to say.
I know this sounds strange, but I believe your mission is in grave danger. Someone close to you cannot be trusted.
Amelia raised an eyebrow, skepticism evident in her expression.
And who might that be?
Fred Noonan,
Demetri replied without hesitation.
I've heard things that suggest he may not have your best interests at heart.
Amelia frowned, crossing her arms.
I've known Fred for years. He's a loyal and skilled friend. Why would you accuse him of betrayal?
I understand how it sounds, but please listen to me. Your life depends on it,
Demetri pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. Tears welled up in Amelia's eyes, but she squared her shoulders, refusing to let emotion cloud her judgment.
You're not implying Fred would purposely do something to harm me, are you?
She asked, visibly shaken.
All I know is that they don't want you flying out of here tomorrow, and they'll do anything to prevent it,
Demetri told her passionately.
Who are they?
Amelia pressed, her voice firm despite the fear lurking beneath.
This may sound crazy, but I think it's our own government. They're afraid of what your success might mean politically.
Amelia shook her head, disbelief etched onto her face.
I've received threats, yes. And I've had more engine problems and funding issues than I'd consider reasonable. But at the end of the day, this is a personal accomplishment. Not just for me, but an example of what women can really do. Surely a plane ride couldn't be so important to an entire nation.
Demetri shook his head, raising his hands helplessly.
I don't see why would either. All I know is that some of those people pretending to be reporters aren't reporters. And your friend Noonan is far too friendly with them.
For a long moment, Amelia studied him, weighing his words carefully. Finally, she sighed, resignation settling over her features.
I can't abandon this mission. Not now. Not when so much rides on it. But fine. I'll keep an eye on Fred. But I know you're wrong about him.
I'm not,
Demetri said firmly.
Please trust me. If he doesn't board your plane tomorrow, for any reason, neither should you.
That night, unable to sleep, Demetri wandered the outskirts of the town, far on the other side of the airfield, keeping to the shadows to avoid detection by the G-men. His plan to keep watch over the plane and fix what the G-men would break was a disaster. All of a sudden, there were more Americans around the hangar, obviously more G-men, and there was no way Demetri would ever get to Amelia's plane undetected. As he walked, the shadowed man materialized behind him, seemingly out of thin, silent air.
You're playing a dangerous game, Demetri,
The shadowed man said, his voice low and menacing.
Do you really think getting Amelia on that plane will save your family? You know if she boards that airplane tomorrow, that she will be killed. You should have told her they planned to murder her.
Demetri stiffened, refusing to turn around. The shadowed man was there, right behind him, and closer to Demetri than he'd ever come before, his presence suffocating. The world had suddenly gone deathly silent except for the shadowed man's voice.
Stay away from me. I know what I have to do.
The shadowed man chuckled darkly.
You know nothing. The AI lies to you. She manipulates you just as she manipulates the threads of time itself.
Lies? Manipulation? Is that supposed to convince me to trust you instead?
Demetri shot back, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. This man and his actions are what caused him to lose his family to begin with. He'd never forgotten that. He spun around to confront the figure, only to find a ghost-like apparition wavering before him. The shadowed man's form shifted like smoke caught in a breeze, neither fully present nor entirely absent. It was unsettling to say the least. No wonder he was called the shadowed man, Demetri thought.
You have to question what you've been told.
The shadowed man continued, his lips moving eerily ahead of his words.
Who benefits most if Amelia completes her destiny? Think about it, Demetri. Think carefully.
Demetri clenched his fists, torn between anger and doubt.
The one who benefits most if Amelia is successful is myself. At least my wife and daughter will have a chance, and that's why I have to make sure she is on that plane.
And she's using that to ensure you do her bidding. But you have to ask, why does the AI want her on the plane?
The AI wants her to complete her mission too. To fix history.
The shadowed man smirked, his ghostly, wavering expression dripping with mockery.
Are you sure about that? The AI wants her on that plane only because she knows that it will be sabotaged.
I heard them. They're going to kill her tomorrow no matter what. They'll have every conceivable way for her to get off this island watched. Her only hope is to get on that plane.
That plane will never leave this airfield, and Amelia will die within it. It's written in history. Is that what you want?
No,
Demetri said solemnly, his voice barely above a whisper.
it's the last thing I would want.
Then don't let her board that plane tomorrow. Find another way to save her.
The shadowed man countered sharply. With that, he vanished, stepping back into the portal from whence he had come, leaving Demetri alone with his doubts. But at least now because of the shadowed man's words, he had a real plan. After the encounter with the shadowed man, Demetri knew what he had to do. The air was thick with tension as Demetri approached Fred Noonan just outside of the hangar. The navigator stood alone in front of Amelia's plane. Amelia was nowhere to be seen. As he approached, he noticed something looked different about the plane in this dim light of night, but didn't really focus on trying to discover what it might be. Fred was smoking another cigarette. There were several butts already on the ground at his feet, his face etched with guilt and uncertainty. Demetri's footsteps echoed faintly against the cracked pavement, each step deliberate, calculated. He stopped a few paces away, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence like a blade.
Noonan,
Demetri began, his tone low but firm.
we need to talk.
Fred Noonan stiffened, his jaw tightening as he turned to face Demetri. For a moment he said nothing, his eyes darting nervously around the deserted area. Fred Noonan looked to be in his early 50s and an inch taller than he, Demetri's mind unconsciously calculated. Finally, Noonan exhaled a shaky breath, the ember of his cigarette glowing brighter in the dim light. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tinged with defensiveness. "I've got work to do." Demetri took a step closer, his piercing gaze locking onto Noonan's.
You've been working with them, haven't you? The government agents who want Amelia dead.
Noonan's cigarette froze halfway to his lips. His hand trembled slightly before he forced himself to speak. What are you talking about?
You know exactly what I'm talking about,
Demetri pressed, his voice rising slightly.
You were supposed to delay her flights, create problems that would make her give up without risking anyone's life. Just break enough things to make her quit while keeping your hands clean. But now that is not enough for them, is it?
Noonan's shoulders slumped, the weight of his betrayal crashing down on him. He looked away, unable to meet Demetri's accusing stare. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he muttered, almost to himself. They promised me easy money, a way to buy a home for my wife and I in Southern California. All I had to do was slow things down, force her to give up. No one gets hurt, just Amelia's pride takes a hit. But she's entrenched in seeing this through to the end. I know now she will never give this up. Demetri clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface.
But now they've crossed the line. They're planning to kill her tomorrow if she doesn't quit. And you're part of that plan whether you like it or not.
I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I was protecting us. If we just gave up the mission, no one would get hurt. But now I see the truth. And I hate myself for it. Noonan hesitated, guilt flashing across his face. Finally, he added reluctantly, I don't know what to do, he admitted softly, his voice cracking under the strain. I thought I was doing the right thing. But now I see how wrong I was. Demetri studied him for a long moment, searching for any sign of deception. When he found none, he let out a heavy sigh.
We can still fix this,
he said, his tone softening slightly.
But we'll have to move fast. If we don't get Amelia off this island safely, everything falls apart, including your chance at redemption.
Noonan swallowed hard, nodding slowly. What do you need me to do? Under the cover of darkness, Demetri and Fred Noonan left Amelia behind at the airfield to make the final preparations before takeoff in the morning. Their plan is clear but fraught with risk. Their goal was simple: find a local fisherman willing to smuggle Amelia off the island discreetly tonight. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was their only hope. As they approached the docks, the salty tang of the ocean mingled with the humid night air. A small fishing vessel bobbed gently in the water, its owner leaning casually against the railing. Demetri scanned the area cautiously, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. Fresh tire tracks marred the dirt path leading to the dock, and tools lay scattered haphazardly nearby. The fisherman's demeanor seemed unusually nervous as they approached, his eyes darting toward the shadows as though expecting someone, or something, to emerge.
This feels off,
Demetri muttered under his breath, nudging Fred.
Look at the setup. Someone's already been here.
Fred frowned, following Demetri's gaze. You think the G-men got to him? Fred asked.
I'd bet my life on it. I would bet that they threaten every fisherman on this island by now,
Demetri replied grimly.
I'm certain someone is watching us even now.
That's good, Fred said and nodded with approval, swallowing hard. Together they walked over to the fisherman and began to broker a deal for the use of his boat. The stakes had just gotten higher. Their deal made with the fisherman, they headed back for the second part of their plan. But back at the airfield, chaos reigned. More G-men had arrived, their presence suffocating as they tightened their grip on the area. Amelia's Electra, they quickly learned, had been confiscated for an urgent inspection. The agents moved with precision around the plane, their movements synchronized as though rehearsed. Fred rushed ahead, being recognized and allowed to enter the hangar. One of the G-men spotted Demetri lingering near the hangar and strode toward him, his expression grim. Who are you? The agent demanded. He was a big, intimidating type of man, his voice sharp and authoritative. And why are you poking around here? Demetri raised his hands slowly, feigning innocence.
Just a traveler passing through,
He said smoothly, his tone calm despite the storm brewing inside him.
I heard about Amelia Earhart's flight and wanted to see it for myself.
The agent narrowed his eyes, clearly unconvinced. You don't look like your average tourist. Where is your passport?
Lost my papers during transit. Happens more often than you'd think.
The agent sneered, clearly unimpressed. Good story. Too bad I don't believe a word of it. We have received word that German spies have been sent to sabotage this young woman's plane. We won't let that happen. We'll be keeping a close eye on you until then. Demetri's heart sank. Not only were they laying down the propaganda groundwork for the story they would spoon-feed to the public after they dealt with Amelia, but now it looked like Demetri had been picked to be their scapegoat. As the agent turned away, barking orders to his men to keep an eye on Demetri, they circled the airfield, pretending to be guarding the area around the front of the hangar, while simultaneously cutting off every possible escape route. Worse still, they intended to keep him under close watch until after Amelia's doomed flight. He had to find a way to talk with Amelia and let her know he and Fred's plan. It was now almost 9 a.m., and the morning sun was bright. Amelia was scheduled to fly out soon. A great day for a plane ride, Demetri thought. He'd finally found a quiet corner of the airfield, away from prying eyes for a few minutes, for he and Fred to talk. He was disgruntled and suspicious that Amelia wasn't there as well. As soon as he got in front of him, Noonan confessed everything. Demetri listened intently, his expression unreadable.
You tipped her off about the sabotage, about them wanting to kill her, didn't you?
Fred nodded, relief washing over him. Yeah. Before you even approached me last night. I had to. You don't know her. She is like a dog with a bone in her mouth. She would have still gotten on that plane this morning despite what you'd told her. Coming from me, I think it made a difference.
She has to be scared as hell,
Demetri breathed.
Yes, but she's smart. She figured out what was going on pretty quickly. We came up with a plan. Switch her plane with that look-alike outside. She spent the night moving our gear over to her actual plane that we had moved to the back of the hangar after you and I left last night. That's where you found me, keeping a lookout as she worked.
Demetri's eyes widened in surprise.
You mean the Electra they're tearing apart now isn't even hers?
No, it's not, Noonan confirmed. I'm betting they never seen Amelia's plane, so we're banking on them being too focused on watching the one out front so we can slip away in our actual plane before any one of them is the wiser.
When did you have time? We left right after we talked.
It was simple to get the plane pushed to the back. The mechanics move planes all the time. It was nothing out of the ordinary to get them to move another plane on short notice. I had it started when I went to grab my jacket and hat last night before we left. The other plane had already been rolled out. They'd mistaken it for Amelia's, which they left in the hangar. Trading planes was a better plan. The one you and I hatched last night will have to be the backup. Amelia and I knew we needed a good backup but couldn't come up with one. And I only went through with your plan just to buy her more time to get things done. Sorry, I didn't trust you. But I do now. And if this doesn't work, we'll need that backup plan of yours to see her safe. For the first time since arriving in 1937, Demetri felt a flicker of hope.
Good thinking,
He said, clapping Fred on the shoulder.
Now we just need to get Amelia airborne, and I think my backup plan will still help with that. Things should start to happen very soon.
And he was right. Just then, the sound of approaching footsteps forced them to sprint to the outside of the hangar toward the back, where Amelia waited, their hearts pounding with adrenaline. Every second counted as Demetri and Fred burst around the corner of the hangar. Amelia greeted them with a fierce smile.
You were supposed to be here a half hour ago.
she quipped, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. We had to wait for a distraction so we wouldn't lead them here, Fred said to her feverishly.
Yeah, it seems about half of them went riding out all of a sudden to a nearby fishing village. It seems you were recently spotted getting on a fishing boat,
Demetri said coolly with a coy grin. His plan had indeed helped to distract the G-men watching them, helping Noonan and he get away to get to Amelia.
What? Never mind, you can tell me all about it later. Let's get out of here. I've got a mission to complete.
Amelia grinned. She was actually giddy with all the excitement as she and Noonan climbed aboard the plane and headed forward.
Demetri, you have to move the chocks.
She yelled back before he could climb into the plane. Even though he rushed to get it done, Demetri had just enough time to get the last black wheel chock moved before he heard a man yell, "Over there!" As the plane's engine fired up, it began rolling toward the open runway. The same big man that had confronted him earlier was now yelling orders, while pointing in their direction as he and his men began to give chase.
Go, get out of here now,
Demetri yelled, closing the door to the plane and slapping it hard to get their attention in the cockpit. The engines screamed in protest as Amelia revved them, and as the smell of fuel and smoke filled the air, the plane began taxiing down the runway. One of the G-men fired his gun recklessly at the plane, and Demetri noticed the bullets only hit the plane back where the passenger cabins should be. Relieved as he was sure Amelia and Noonan would both be in the cockpit by now. The few onlookers were astonished to see the group of men shooting at the plane, and their gasps could be heard even from a distance. Furious, the big man in charge ordered the G-men to put away their guns. Demetri immediately ran as quickly as his legs would take him into the foliage that grew high beside the runway. None of the G-men even looked in his direction, but only at the plane, as it lifted higher. There in the foliage, Demetri stopped briefly, and he too watched as the plane soared into the sky, soon disappearing into the horizon. For a moment, he allowed himself to hope for the best. He'd done it. Amelia and Fred could now complete their voyage around the world. He didn't know how this could change his future, but at least now it gave him hope that it might. It was more than an hour later that Demetri finally found his way back to his makeshift hideout. The G-men had all but vanished after Amelia had taken off. Of that, he was glad. Demetri examined his leather notebook, finally understanding why certain pages had gone missing when he crossed through the time waves. The AI's explanation echoed in his mind. Only living matter can pass through time waves intact. He flipped through the remaining pages, his fingers brushing against the ink-smudged paper. These were the pages drenched in his tears, soaked with his sorrow and desperation. They carried traces of his essence, his vitality, and that was why they survived, he supposed. These pages were some of the most cherished thoughts he'd written down, and he was glad to have them with him still. He supposed the sweat that had seeped into the cotton of his clothing is what allowed them to pass through the portal as well. No risk of losing them after tonight, he thought. He had sweated into his clothes through and through at this point. Abruptly, the radio nearby began to static and slowly came to life again.
Well done, Demetri. Amelia has safely departed the island, and this fracture will soon be healed,
The AI proclaimed. Then just as abruptly as it had come to life, the radio's static faded away, and before him arose the time waves, distorting the light and consuming all sound around it. As Demetri prepared to step back through the distorted waves, a sudden memory update hit him like a punch to the gut. Amelia's plane had disappeared not long after takeoff. That was the new history. So despite all their efforts to get her safely off the island, history had changed, but Amelia Earhart's fate was unaltered. Demetri staggered under the weight of this revelation. His mind raced as he replayed the AI's cryptic instructions in his head.
Amelia Earhart must disappear in order to set the timeline right.
For the first time, The full extent of the AI's manipulation became clear. She had led him to believe that getting Amelia off the island would save her, that she would complete her journey around the world and restore the fractured timeline. But the truth was far darker. The AI knew all along that Amelia wouldn't survive.
She played me,
Demetri muttered bitterly, his fists clenched in anger. Every word, every instruction, it was all a lie. She made me think we were saving Amelia, giving her a chance to finish what she started. But she knew. She knew Amelia would perish anyway. This whole thing was never about helping her succeed. It was about making sure she disappeared. Overwhelmed by a mix of anger and betrayal, Demetri struggled to process the enormity of the deception. All the risks they'd taken, all the sacrifices, they meant nothing. And though he could see that some of his history had changed, Demetri's family was still lost to him. The AI had used him, he thought, in anger. He stepped into the portal. He was ready to go back home and put this adventure behind him, back in that gray area of his brain where it belonged. He felt that he was only halfway into the portal when he saw the shadowed man within the time waves. More accurately, the other stood silently waiting for him. This was some form of manipulation of the portal. It was evident that, like the AI, the shadowed man had a deep understanding of the time portal. Demetri's first time through it had taken all but a blink of an eye. Now, it was as if time stood still, and in the center of it was the shadowed man. His form, just as it appeared outside of the time portal, wavered like smoke caught in a breeze. His voice echoed hauntingly, confirming Demetri's worst fears.
Now you know the I will mislead you,
the shadowed man said, his tone laced with bitterness.
I know too well how she manipulates history for her own purposes, weaving threads of truth and lies together so tightly that even those who see the fractures can't unravel them.
Demetri stared at the apparition, his mind reeling.
Why are you telling me this?
I know you hate me for the choices I've made in the past, but no, I did not act alone. And I now believe if you know the truth, in the future you can make better decisions than the ones I have made.
The shadowed man replied, his tone unreadable. He paused for a moment before saying,
You'll understand soon enough, hopefully before it is too late.
Before Demetri could respond, the shadowed man vanished. He stepped from the portal and simply vanished, leaving him alone with more questions than answers. It was a blink of an eye later that Demetri emerged from the time waves. He found himself in Honolulu, Hawaii, by the looks of things. He recognized this area as he had been here before on an assignment. But this wasn't where he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be back home. A couple of sailors in vintage U.S. Navy uniforms walked by, looking him up and down as they passed. He must have looked like a vagabond to them. But it is what they were talking about that really caught his attention. The discussion was about unusual messages being heard over the radios that no one could decipher. Wait, he thought, with a sinking feeling growing in his gut. To the sailors he called over to them. Hey, you there. What day is it? One of the sailors called back to him the day and date. But what year? Demetri pressed. 1941, the other sailor said, looking back with an even more peculiar look at Demetri.
Wait, isn't Saturday, December 6th, 1941, the day before the attack?
He whispered out loud, his voice sounding nervous even to his own ears. Had she sent him here deliberately? Was this another fracture in the timeline? Whatever the reason why he now found himself at the U.S. Naval Base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the day before it would be attacked by Japan, Demetri had just one thought in mind now. Where is the AI?
This concludes this amazing episode. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I enjoyed creating it for you. Now, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, but if you want a personal notification when the next episode in the series is published, simply click on the link in the description below to join my free email notification group. As a subscriber, I have to tell you that you get a special $30 bonus offer. Now, with a bonus this good, I can't offer it for long, so make sure you join up right now and join the email notification group. Thanks so much, and I will see you back in time.